What they've shown is a sense of empathy. The president rarely displays empathy, and you can add tonight's display outside Walter Reed to the list. The president did not seem to take into account that he might be putting people at risk for a publicity stunt. And 7 months into a pandemic that has killed over 210,000 Americans, the president said tonight he's just now getting a new understanding of the virus. Well, understanding can't be confused for empathy, because it doesn't seem very empathetic to get into a vehicle and ride around while infected with a highly contagious disease. With me now is Marissa Lee. She's the CEO of Beacon Advisors and the founder of the Pink Agenda. And Claire Bidwell-Smith. She's a grief therapist and the author of Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. Thank you both so much for being here. I wonder, Marissa, what you think empathetic leadership would look like in a moment like this.
It definitely does not look like hosting a COVID parade when you know you're sick and you know you have something that can infect and kill lots of people. I can tell you from my time and experience in the Obama White House what it looks like. You know, it looks like how President Obama showed up after Sandy Hook, even though he admitted he had nothing to offer those families beyond empathy. It looks like President Obama standing and giving unscripted remarks where he talks about how if Trayvon Martin were his son, like, he can identify with that. You know, he spoke to Black people. He spoke to America when America was in pain. And right now, America is grieving. You know, we've lost over 200,000 lives to coronavirus alone. And then I even think back to my own experiences losing my mom, and I can't imagine what it's like to lose a loved one under any circumstances in the midst of this pandemic. And I want a president who understands grief, because I believe, based on my experiences, that grief and an understanding of grief leads to greater empathy, which then in turn leads to better policy. So unfortunately, you know, we are not getting what we deserve in this moment, but I hope we will soon.
Claire, I want to return to a moment from the debate last week where you had President Trump taking a shot at Joe Biden's son, Hunter, and Biden's response that he's proud of his son's recovery from addiction. That made a lot of headlines, seemed to resonate with a lot of people. I wonder why you believe that is.
I don't know. I think that we need to have a lot of forgiveness and humility with people. I think that we are so quick to rush and judge and shame people. And I think that that is happening more than ever right now in this kind of culture of fear that we're going through during COVID. And I think that more empathy, as we're talking about, is really important right now.
I mean, talk to me a little bit about anxiety, because there is grief, and we've talked a lot about grief, but there's also right now a lot of anxiety around this virus, both from a health perspective and from an economic perspective. I mean, are we looking for leadership that can both acknowledge our grief and our anxiety?
Absolutely. And I don't think we're seeing it at all. I think that our culture and our country and our world is more anxious than ever going through this epidemic. And I think that this pandemic, and I think that when we're anxious, it spills out in so many different ways. It spills out in anger, and it spills out in hate, and it spills out in quick judgment. And I think we're seeing that everywhere right now. And when you peel up the lid of fear and anxiety, underneath it is almost always sadness and just more fear. And I think that when we start to really look at those things, we can treat our anxiety and we can work through it.
There was also a story this week that touched a lot of people. Heartbreaking news that Chrissy Teigen lost her pregnancy. She was pregnant with her third child. Teigen and her husband, John Legend, had decided to call that child Jack. In a social media post, she wrote, "We never decide on our babies' names until the last possible moment after they're born, just before we leave the hospital." She added, "To our Jack, I'm so sorry that the first few moments of your life were met with so many complications that we couldn't give you the home you needed to survive. We will always love you." Marissa, this story struck such a chord for so many people across this country. I know that you've written about it. Why do you think it hit a nerve?
You know, I think when we saw those pictures, you know, for me personally, it was honestly like getting punched in the gut. You know, you could see their pain, And the other thing that I saw when I looked at those pictures was their love. And I think that grief is really just another form of love. You know, they experienced this just horrific, and it sounds like fairly traumatizing loss. And seeing those pictures of them, you know, in that hospital room, I mean, if it didn't inspire empathy or, you know, something akin to empathy in someone, you know, I'm not sure what else would. My heart absolutely broke for them, and I'm glad that they shared them because, you know, one of the most important things that I have learned about grief over the years, from losing a parent and losing a pregnancy last year, you know, being able to access whatever it is you need to heal and share whatever you feel comfortable sharing really can make a difference.
Claire, we're so often shielded from grief, and we're living in a moment where we are experiencing individual grief related to this virus. We're experiencing collective grief, society-wide grief. And so to watch this expression, the decision to share this grief seemed like a pretty radical act.
I think it is and it isn't. I'm also so glad that she shared it. I think we don't see it enough. I think that as a culture, Maria Shriver has a great quote that says that we are a grief illiterate nation. And I believe that is true. I think we're really afraid to look grief and death and loss and end of life in the eye. And we're being forced to do that more than ever right now during COVID. And I think we do need to talk about it, and we do need to share about it. Social media is corrupt right now because all we're seeing are images of perfect things, and that doesn't make anybody feel better. So I think we need to share more truth, more raw images like this. We need to understand that we all go through this, we all grieve, and we need to feel less alone when we see those things.
Marissa, I only have about a minute left, but I want to give you final thoughts on what this tells us about the way we treat women, women's health in this country.
I mean, I think the way that some people unfortunately responded to the pictures that were shared is disgusting and very sad, but I think that's because, for better or worse, a lot of things about women's bodies and women's health continue to be stigmatized. You know, it wasn't until 1993 that women were required to be a part of federally funded research studies. And so I think, you know, the more we share, the more we shine light on these various challenges and health issues, the more likely we are to lead to more awareness and then therefore, you know, better solutions for people. So I hope that we continue to move in a more positive direction.
All right, Marissa and Claire, thank you both. Coming up at the top of the hour.